Hello and welcome to the Women's Rights Network. My name is Emma Bryn and I'm talking today to Olwen, who is also a child of a transitioner. I run www.childrenoftransitioners.org, where you can read writing by the both of us on the subject. So what I thought we would do today is talk to Olwen about her experiences of having a father who transitioned. Welcome, Olwen.
Hello.
Hello. And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you a bit about your childhood.
Sure. So I'm Olwen. I am now 61, and I have had a full career. I'm about to retire. I have a mother. I had a father who transitioned, who died back in February, and I have 3 kids who are grown up, and yeah, I've had a busy and full life, but and I am the daughter of a transitioning parent, and that happened when I was in my 20s. So not as a child. So I'm the adult child of a transitioner.
So when you look back at your childhood, do you think there are any clues from your father, or was it a complete surprise?
It was a complete surprise. My father, and as we have this conversation, I'm probably going to be all over the place in terms of my father and he, and kind of my parent.
And cool. We're not policing pronouns.
Yeah, no, we're not. No, and that's the funny thing about being the child of a transitioner. You can, so my father was my father, but I called him, her, and she to her face, and to when I was talking about her, using her name, because I think names are quite important in all this. And and she happened to have the same name. It was a name that in Wales could be either male or female. In fact, it was Lynn. I'm not going to try and avoid saying it, because she's dead, and I'm that's fine. So it's either my father and he, or Lynn and her and she. So we'll go with that. So no clues really at all. My dad was quite macho as a bloke. He was quite emotional, already a sort of black sheep in his own family, and I mean that only in that when he was quite he was very bright and brilliant and academic, and went to university, but not to study to study a subject that any of us now would think is, blimey, that's the thing, but not law at Cambridge or Oxford, as his brothers had, or as his elder brother had and his younger brother would, and did something quite kind of creative and arty, which was interesting. Came from a kind of non-conformist religious background, with a father who was a minister of religion, and quite Victorian in that upbringing, and quite kind of censorious. So I was sent away to school at a very, very young age, out of Wales into England, and I guess so he was. There was nothing, there were no clues. And in fact, as a child, when my brother and I, we were seen as, in the family, we were seen as the liberal family. We were allowed to listen to pop music, and we kind of, we went to the cinema on Sundays, although my grandfather did comment on that once, and commented on the fact that we were allowed to run barefoot in the house, which was kind of, a sign of depravity. And we, I think we were known as a household who read The Guardian, which again was kind of had brought with it all kind of liberal ideas. So my father was already half sort of in that kind of freedom, but also quite strict and restrictive in his own sense. So I'll give you some examples. When we watched Top of the Pops, we were allowed to watch Top of the Pops. He did turn off the Forsyth saga and when it was in that violent scene, in Irene's violent that I can remember that being quite a traumatic thing. He got very kind of upset. I'm not sure why we were watching it at the time anyway. I can't remember what age we were, but it was switched off and not appropriate. And he was quite angry about it being not appropriate. And we'd watch Top of the Pops and he'd say, is that a man or a woman? This is kind of
right.
T-Rex. And be disparaging about it and say, oh, what trash are you watching? That man's got makeup on, and sort of a kind of, censorious about that kind of thing. And I do remember comments. My mother was very beautiful and a very kind of slight woman, and kind of looked like a 1960s models in lots of ways. She had very dark hair and was very striking looking. And he was very proud of encouraging her to wear nice clothes, and was infuriated by my insistence on wearing jeans and not looking very feminine, and didn't stop me doing tomboyish things. I liked climbing trees. We were quite active, but I had my ears pierced when I was about 17, and my father was absolutely furious and said that I'd mutilated myself, and that this was a sort of, but I'm not sure whose voice that was, whether it was his father and his upbringing was kind of coming out like that in terms of what an ideal woman should be like, feminine and graceful and all that. So no, there was no, and angry. We were in a household of, he was cross a lot of the time. He was quite pernickety about things being tidy. There used to be a lot of rowing and arguing, which made me quite anxious as a child. A lot of shouting. On the other hand, a lot of debating and a lot of kind of conversation. But I often got the feeling that my voice and my mother's voice was less important than his and my brother's. So no, there was, and very, very, very capable, very practical, very sort of physical as a man, and a bit overweight a lot of my childhood. My father was overweight, and maybe uncomfortable in his body, I don't know, but I kind of didn't really, uncomfortable talking about sex, absolutely, and kind of uncomfortable about talking about, but that was quite common in the 1960s and 70s of, not really. Yeah.
I find, when I think about my dad, one of the things that I think, obviously you retrofit, don't you? You look back at your childhood and you think, are these clues? Is this the thing? And one of the things that my dad was, he never really hugged me. He wasn't physical at all. It was just, what I really, really remember from my childhood is this kind of physical distance between us.
Yeah.
And we weren't a family that ever saw one another naked or saw one another's bodies or were comfortable at all with our bodies. Do you think there was something there?
Certainly there was. There was a sort of yes, that wasn't nice. It was a kind of chapel thing, you wouldn't. But on the other hand, I played the role in the family of keeping everyone happy and emotionally on the level. So when my parents rowed, my father would take it really badly and become withdrawn and upset. My mum coped with it in her own way, really. But and I'd be the one who'd kind of, have a climb into his lap and have a cuddle and say, "Oh, don't be sad, Daddy," and he would be very emotional. I can remember seeing my father cry on occasion, very traumatic things. The day of the Aberfan disaster, which was very close to all of us. I think that might be the first time I remember seeing my father cry. So there was a kind of he did, yeah. So there was a physical, and always was a physical kind of physicality and hugginess about it. But it was this thing about nakedness was not. There was a kind of some kind of repression, not for us children. I don't think I was ever made to feel, and I certainly saw my mother. I'd see my mother in the bath, but not my father ever. It was kind of private. Yeah.
Something about my mum's Welsh culture that I've really noticed is these very strict roles for what the women do and what the men do. Like my stepfather had never seen uncooked spaghetti, and he loved spaghetti. He walked into the kitchen once. He was like, "What's that?" He had just never seen it. Was incapable of making things.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was played out most dramatically in my memory at funerals. So big valleys funerals. My parents had both come from the valleys, and if somebody died, if one of my grandfather's uncles died, there'd be a family funeral, and then there'd be, you'd go to the chapel, there'd be kind of singing, and then the men would go to the cemetery and the women would go and make the sandwiches. That wasn't in our family. We were, we were a sort of modern 19. I was born in 1960, so there was a sort of we were quite liberal about that kind of thing. So there wasn't, but there was something in there which was kind of a kind of morality, a kind of bit of a morality that was, and you never knew when you transgressed it. Not often. We went to chapel and Sunday school until my grandmother died, because it was something that my father had promised her that he would do. Yeah.
So he wasn't, I hate to use the word gender roles, I suppose sex roles or something, but he didn't like expect your mother to do everything, or
no, my mother worked. Right. He found a kind of intellectual equal in my mother. She'd studied history. He found her interesting. He wrote about this afterwards, which is how I know that. He was very controlling. He was kind of, his word went in the house. And there was a kind of, I remember most that element of control. Retrospectively, I think he was trying to keep control of himself, and so he control of the rest of us to a degree that was overbearing, unpleasant, and I guess coerce. It wasn't. I mean, my mother went out. She was a teacher. She went out to work. There wasn't a keeping control of money, although they often argued about money. He was just unhappy in himself, I think, and it kind of came out in a controlling of the rest of us in the house. And my brother coped by kind of leaving the house as much as possible, and I kind of stayed in there because it was I felt it was too dangerous not to be there to make sure that everything was all right.
Yes.
I was the peacekeeper, the little, terrified. I used to have nightmares, I used to not have nightmares, daymares, really, anxiety that something awful was going to happen. And I also felt sometimes that I'd been adopted. Maybe all kids do, I don't know, but there was something in the family that made me anxious and thinking this isn't right. But that's the only indication of what was to come.
Yes, I wondered if my father, I always felt that my father was withholding something from me. I remember once asking him if he had another family somewhere, which seems a really bizarre thing to ask. I remember just randomly saying, "Do you have a wife and children somewhere else?"
Yes.
Because there was something secretive about him,
Yeah.
and I couldn't figure it out as a child, obviously.
No. And there was something definitely there. And I think I was about 10 or 11 when my mother, on a journey, told me and my brother that they had had to get married because
Mm.
she got pregnant, and that they had, and that was such a traumatic experience, because they felt they were made to feel so ashamed of that,
Mm.
and that the wedding was a shameful disaster. There were all kinds of sort of very unpleasant things from my grandfather. Her parents were kind of more liberal, and actually they'd had to get married as well. So it was but it was definitely, and I put everything that changed a lot for me. That made me
Mm.
more anxious. It made me think they didn't love each other, which was, I used to, and I wonder, I think I felt a bit, I think retrospectively, I felt a bit neglected, as because there was so much kind of preoccupation in the household. My mum says that that a school teacher who was a friend of theirs, who my school teacher said, if I didn't know where she came from, if I didn't know the family, I'd think that she was neglected, they said about me.
Mhm.
And I was kind of running around in an environment where everyone else's confusion and emotional needs and trauma
Mm.
more important, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I that resonates
Yeah.
absolutely, because I mean, I was neglected. I think honestly, there were times when I think the neighbours should have called social services because I was just left alone and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But I think as well, there's something destabilizing, isn't there? There's something, your parents' anxiety, you pick up on it, even if they're pretending it's not there,
Yeah.
and that sort of destabilizes you and
Yeah.
makes you worry about, is it going to end? Are they going to divorce? What's going to happen?
What's going to happen? And of course, so there was absolutely no hint from my father, not even to my mother. There was
Mm.
there was a secret. So there was certainly a secret that my father had,
Mm.
a feeling that my father had, not acted upon,
Yeah.
that my mother didn't know about, and neither
Mm.
did we, which kind of fueled that whole uh, conflict, a family in conflict, not really knowing what it was, any of it was about.
So, how did this come out? I mean, how did you
Yeah.
find out and your mum find out?
How so? So I went away to university, and my brother was older than me. He had his first job. I had my first job post university, and hadn't it had been a bit quiet. It had all been a bit quiet. I did stay. I stayed very attached to my parents. I didn't have that. I didn't break away from my parents
Mhm.
emotionally. I don't think. Maybe it still didn't feel. It didn't feel safe to do so. I can remember an awful row, uh, which isn't really relevant, but I can remember that being quite traumatic. But I was still we were I was I my friends would come on holiday with me and my parents.
Right.
The attraction was that we were sailing as a family, and so holidays were fantastic fun and adventures,
Mm.
and you needed extra crew, and so friends would come with me. And my dad was definitely, the captain. There's no arguing with someone on a boat who's in charge.
No.
It's dangerous, and I was very comfortable in that role. um, um, and so friends came, and everybody got along. So, and then there was a period of, I can just remember this dark winter, a dark winter, and I was working in London. My brother was working in South London, and my dad said that he was coming to London and he'd like to take us for lunch. Hadn't done that before. He'd never done that before. So, it's a novelty. And so we met at a restaurant in where I was working in Islington. And as we went in, or as we were sitting there in the restaurant, I kind of clocked a few things visually, just clocked things. My dad had lost a lot of weight. His hair was longer than usual, not cut short. And I noticed that there was the tiniest hint of peach nail varnish remnants around his nails.
Right.
I know I noticed it. We didn't discuss it. We didn't talk about that. I can't remember what we talked about at all. I've written a bit about this, so I've really thought hard about it. Didn't discuss it with my brother. We went our different ways. It's not the kind of thing I would have discussed with my brother probably. And it wasn't until a while later, maybe a few months, that I can remember having a phone call with my mother, who said, I think there's something that you should know. We've kind of discussed it, and there's something that you should know. And she said, it's about Dad, and so Dad has been wanting to wear women's clothes. So I kind of went, right, okay, and I'm thinking, and I'm saying, how do you mean? Not really wanting any intimate details of why somebody might want to. And I knew enough to know that might be a sexual kick kind of thing, or not, or and a bedroom thing. And I was going, oh, okay, so that's odd, and I was going, my goodness, that's a kind of so that's called something. It's called being a transvestite. Yeah, so I really didn't want to know. And I can remember thinking, oh gosh, this is the moment when your parents tell you about their sex life, and I'm really not interested. And but it was clearly, I don't remember the sequence of events of what happened next, but I do remember, because I hadn't been home for some reason. I hadn't been home for a while. Didn't particularly, was living my life in London. And then it kind of, I don't know whether it was another conversation, but it kind of resonated, and I can remember thinking, okay, I can deal with this. I can deal with this. I think this was just about my dad's a transvestite, although I hadn't quite. I mean, if it's a bed, there was that moment when it became apparent that it wasn't a bedroom thing. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't that this was something different. And there must have been a couple of years where it became apparent that my dad wanted to wear women's clothes. And I do remember that he found the Beaumont Society that you mentioned, Emma, previously. And I know that my mum, long suffering, did her best to understand and to be sympathetic and to and try and understand what was going on. And I think she got some comfort from speaking to other wives in Beaumont Society, where they had kind of fancy dress parties and stuff. And the next but the next thing that happened, I also remember, so there was a struggle for me. There was a struggle for me between this is my dad, I loved my dad, I wanted to be supportive, I was a kind of, a grown up, and
You're a modern woman.
I was a modern woman, and
You're a Londoner.
I had no problem with anybody being how they wanted. I went to an art school, for God's sake. Everybody wore they like. Men had been wearing frocks for ages in my world, and also everything. So it kind of, that's whatever. But I do remember a couple of occasions where it hit me in the face a little bit. So we went on a sailing holiday, and a friend of mine came with us, and it became very clear that my dad had planned this kind of a trip to a hotel with my mum where he would dress as a woman. I got a feeling that we were party to that, or there were increasingly moments when we were party to him presenting as a woman. And clearly he was excited about this, nervous and excited, and I can't quite describe, because on an intellectual level there was me wanting to be supportive, and then on some visceral emotional level a kind of screaming in my head going, this is not right, in terms of this is your father who didn't, who told you that men on top of the pops were kind of depraved, and there was this kind of battle going on inside of me, of a conflict between a struggle to accept what was going on. That went on for a couple of years. My parents moved out to the countryside so that my father would be able to dress as a woman and not be confronted with looks from the neighbours. I don't know how my mother consented to this, but she did. It was a beautiful house, and that's what they wanted to do. I wasn't living at home at the time. I was, growing up and living away. I do remember coming back for a week and having my father. I know what happened next. So what happened next was that my father told the company where he was a partner about this, and he also told his younger brother, and all hell broke loose in terms of rejection from both the company and family. So in me, there was a reaction where my mother and my brother was kind of kept himself out of this pretty much. I'd moved back home temporarily, and I'd moved back to the area and temporarily moved back in home, I think. And my father found another job. So because he'd made a decision at that point, that's it. He had made a decision. This had gone a step further. So this had all gone a step further. He'd had advice. He'd sought medical advice, supposedly. Not a lot of psychological advice, frankly, and had decided that this was his life's goal. It had been what the problem was all this time, and that he was going to undergo gender reassignment, and so he did get a job, a very good job as a woman in London, and came home at the weekends expecting my mother to carry on their marriage like Jan Morris. If Jan, this is they were a pair. She was the love of his life. And my mum hated living alone in the countryside. It terrified her. And I can remember being there one weekend when my dad came home, and he was berating her for not having gone to get, because he by that stage he was living as a woman, because he was undergoing that year of proving that you can do it, and he wanted my mum to go and get his hormone tablets from the chemist, and got irate about it, and something in me snapped. Something absolutely snapped, and I lost my rag completely. And had there been a carving knife within reach, it scared me silly, actually. I just felt I felt murderous, and I got help immediately after that. When I went into counselling, and just spent a lot of time crying, basically.
Yes. So a charitable person might say that your father is on a journey.
Yes.
Of,
self-discovery and self-discovery, having done his duty.
Yeah, having done his duty. That he is, I would say, from my experience now of, these experiences, talking to people with fathers who've been through the same thing, is that his condition is escalating.
Oh, it escalated, and it became from a personal viewpoint. I mean, professionally,
yes,
my dad was excellent at his job, but from a personal point of view, this was absolute on a course of nothing, and you could argue, but nothing else mattered. And that's fine, isn't it? As long as your expectations of other people, it's the expectations on other people is the important thing.
Yes.
And I think my dad expected my mum to stay married and stay accepting of the situation. And for the rest of us, I mean, being cut off from the rest of the family, all of us, my mum included, and me, that was horrible. That's I have scars from that. That felt very lonely. But from my dad's point of view, I don't think he ever quite understood why she couldn't do that. And she found someone else. She found another partner, 20 years younger than her. They did get divorced, and she eventually remarried, and we stayed intact as a family to a certain degree. I can remember. Yeah, I can remember telling my then boyfriend, who became my husband, who knew my dad, knew my dad pre-transition, kind of what was going on. So yeah, there was just that, and my father was still. So it was the mind-bending thing for me was my father was still my father, and was still kind of still behaving like a father in terms of responsibility and emotional connection with me. It was a very weird and odd and sad moment for me, who had spent my life ensuring my dad's emotional well-being from when I was a very small child. And I can remember exactly where we were. It was a beautiful day, and we were in the garden, and I was going, I don't know if I can, I'm having trouble here. I don't know. And he said, I don't need, I'm sure he didn't mean it in a horrible way, but I really took it badly, because he said, I don't need you anymore.
Oh, Lordy.
Oh my gosh. It felt like a kind of, oh, wow, and that replayed itself. I mean, that was quite an interesting thing towards the end of his life and our relationship.
Because he needed you.
Oh yeah, and
needed you again.
I made a decision, but we'll come on to that if we want to keep it logical. I don't, but we could fast forward or.
Okay, so I think this is an interesting thing, because the narcissism manifests quite often in ways that we can recognize. And one of them is having children who are emotionally responsible for you, and then also cutting them out of your life or alienating them, and things like that. And some of it is, I just think there's this kind of pinpoint focus on what they want.
Yeah.
And certainly for both of us, because our fathers were on a transsexual journey, there
Yeah.
was a sort of set of things that they had to do and a kind of mountain to climb. And I think that they sort of felt, and I've seen this with other transsexuals, that they feel that when they've completed this set of obstacles, like a knight's quest to have the operation, get rid of the hair, and dress as a woman and use the toilets and do all these things, then you have the holy grail, which is you've transitioned and you're a woman and it's all fine. Was that your dad's experience? Was that your experience with your dad?
That it kind of did, it did work like that for him. So he successfully transitioned. And from my point of view, the problem for me wasn't that I was cut out from anything. Almost the opposite, in fact. It was that my dad was very family oriented, was very loving as a grandparent, very generous as a grandparent with our children, wanted to be a big part of our lives, was a big part of our lives. And I didn't have any choice. Well, I did have a choice about it. I did have a choice about it, I chose to. So I spent a lot of my adult life keeping her at arm's length, emotionally at arm's length, and bore it well. I think my kids might say differently.
Were you trying to protect yourself or protect your family?
I was always aware of protecting myself and my family. Yeah, absolutely. And it, you know, she was a big personality. She had been, when as a man, quite controlling. Less controlling in a direct way as a woman, but it was quite interesting how she had. She still had. I can remember she would say, why don't we behave like normal families? Normal families would kind of have their grandparents over for Sunday lunch every Sunday. And we don't do that. Why don't you do, why don't you do that? Why can't we be more traditional as a family? Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's, what you really want to be in a family, because I think we do all right as a non-traditional family, and therefore, there are things we do and there are things we don't do. We did still go sailing occasionally and go on holidays, but that just became, I think it was a growing up and separation thing, and not putting up with being controlled anymore. And I think I had quite a kind of at times, my brother got it in the neck. There's occasionally, because if my brother tried to be controlling with me, or I'd watch it, I could let rip. And then they both of them at one stage told me that I had anger management problems. I spent a lot of my adult life seeking advice and help, really, about my emotional, and very successfully, I think. Very successfully. There was an underlying thing going on which I hadn't realized, and I don't think anyone had realized, and that was there were increasingly, and actually my mother, both parents acknowledged that when my father told my mother about himself and what the secret that he'd been keeping was. So this was while I was away at university. I've lost my train of thought there for a second.
So
was I saying?
yeah.
I was saying.
So there is something, because you were talking about your anger, and you're talking really about the boundaries you're setting and how
Oh,
you're
I
trying to
know.
have
I know. It's the
your
problem.
dad on
It's the
your
other
terms.
problem. It was the other
Yeah.
problem. So under extreme. That's right. Under extreme stress, my dad would have a manic episode.
Right.
I don't remember any manic episodes when I was a child. Certainly, as she post transition, a few things happened. And one of them was the day that my dad told my mum. I remember it was a near-death experience, falling in the water off the boat and nearly dying and being physically exhausted and hypothermic probably. And that triggered. I think a neighbour gave my dad Valium or something like that, which loosened everything up, and he told my mum. And then the next thing that I remember is my brother died. So my brother died tragically in an accident. And in the aftermath of that, my dad had a manic episode.
Right.
And then there was another manic episode. And during these manic episodes now, my dad is no longer married to my mum. My brother's now dead. And so I am literally the only relative, and therefore very, very responsible for someone in trouble. My dad had the capacity, particularly, I would say, post operatively or post transition, of making very, very firm and deep friendships with people. So the people that he worked with, the team of people who worked for him, the transition, loved her and stayed friends with her when she retired. There were women and men who told me that they owed their careers to her, and she had lifelong friends, women friends who she would travel with as companions, and she was just very successful at that. But these manic episodes became more pronounced, stayed under the radar of the medical profession. I do remember calling out an out of hours GP, and I said, I've been looking up, this has happened a couple of times, a few years between. I've been looking up what the behavior is when this happens, and I think it's a manic episode. It's kind of got, the 10 points that manic people do when they get in. I can tick them all off, and I was totally dismissed. How can you possibly? You're not a medical, you're not a psychiatrist. It's a very important. You can't just label people, and your dad's not, not your dad, your mother. Actually, I put up with quite a lot of your mother. That was an odd. That was a very odd thing. Having people say, "I've met your mother," and I'm going, "Have you? How did you meet my mother? My mother lives a long way away." And they'd say, "Oh, really? I met her in so-so." And I go, "Oh, right, yes, of course." Yeah, you see. So there was a that got worse, and it got worse, and in the last 5 years of her life, she was on lithium to control that bipolar, and it was eventually bipolar's of extreme spectrum of a very broad spectrum of as a condition, and I don't know intimately enough whether there was depression there. There may have been slight depressive. Certainly after a row or after upset, my dad would be very quiet when I was a child, would be very quiet and down, hence the kind of, why are you sad, daddy? which maybe I just missed it as an adult. I missed any depressive episodes. So yeah, the manic, the bipolar kicked in, and then in the last year of her life, then dementia also kicked in. And I do remember at one point, you know, I was saying about how our family kind of stuck together. Things fell apart a little bit between my parents when my brother died.
Yes.
There was some unpleasantness and difficulty. I came to an understanding. I finally learned how to in an adult way draw boundaries, and
Yes.
And so and she was very, very appreciative and vocal and acknowledging of the great debt of gratitude that she owed me.
Yeah.
And that we both kind of agreed, you know, in the end, the enduring thing through thick and thin was this kind of unconditional love between a parent and a child.
Yes.
So we got there, we got to that. But the journey along the way was tricky.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was sort of thinking about, you know, even the most stable relationships on great foundations don't always survive the traumatic death of, you know, of a very important person. You know, that it sounds like your parents, it was difficult anyway. There were betrayals and,
yeah,
you know, it must have been very, very difficult.
Yeah. And you know, I kind of continued my role as mediator and sort of advocate. What was fascinating towards the very end, she was very pleased about the Gender Recognition Act and having her birth certificate altered. I'm sure I've got two versions of it somewhere, you know. I'm doing family tree stuff at the moment, and I'm just thinking ahead to how confused are people going to be in the future. But there you go. And to have a passport, which was traveling easier. I mean, she could pass as a woman, but I don't think she would have been saying that I think she'd have been very happy. And we did have a conversation actually about the current debate among, you know, about whether trans women are women. She was quite happy to be a trans woman.
Yes.
There wasn't a kind of and biology definitely mattered in that. You know, the first thing she and I would do when we were dealing with the medical profession in the last couple of years was to say, you do realize that, you know, she has a prostate gland, you know, that she has surgery, but the biology here, you know, if we're looking for disease or looking for things that have gone wrong that are causing distress, discomfort, can we just remember that we've got a male-bodied person without the genitalia, you know?
My dad tried to explain it as he had a female brain in a male body. And I know that it's only very recently that people have been saying, no, I'm actually a woman. I'm a woman all the way through.
Yeah.
What did Lynn think, do you think?
Yeah. So Lynn definitely thought that some recent research had said, there is there's something that makes somebody like me, there's a reason, there's a scientific reason for it.
Right.
She'd kind of cottoned on to that. In the last weeks and months, so she died in February, round about Christmas time, we had the most extraordinary conversation. I was recording afterwards, writing to help myself deal with it. I was visiting about 3 times a week into the care home, and she would increasingly, towards the end, she'd mistake me for my mother occasionally, which I think she recognized me most of the time, but there were definitely times she didn't. And she definitely mistook me for her mother and was very upset, was apologizing and saying, you know, I wish I hadn't done it. And I was going, I didn't realize she was my mother. I wish I hadn't done it. I caused so much unhappiness. I should have learnt to be happy as I was. And look what I did to you and me, and look what I did to us. And I was thinking, oh my God, when I clocked what she was saying, you know, and I was able to say, you did what you thought was the best thing at the time. And you know, the rest of us are all right. We're all right. You know, we did just fine. She did say to the end, she said, you know, she said, there'll never be anybody else for me but you. And I could never replace you, or something like that. And I said, she was horrified at the thought that my mother in this conversation might find someone else. Right. And I said, oh, are you going to find someone else? And she goes, are you joking? Are you joking? You must be mad. Really, you know, right. Of course not. So God knows what was going on really in there. I mean, you know, I'm really unsure about whether that was the confusion of dementia. There was no reconciliation between her and her father. There was a reconciliation between her and her younger brother and the family, right. Which meant a lot to her. Yeah. And to me, it meant a lot to me, actually. It meant everything a bit more bearable, really. Yeah.
So I know it's so difficult in families, isn't it? And difficult to have those conversations. One thing I thought was, it was your mother who told you about what your father was doing. So when did you meet Lynn, for, you know, want of a better term?
That was a gradual thing. That was, you know, we were all, you know, I can remember being there, and that was the interesting thing. I can remember being there one weekend, and we're going to go out in the, you know, we're going to go out for a walk somewhere. Right. And it felt wrong to refuse. It felt wrong to refuse. It felt unreasonable. You know, that kind of, right. Is it unreasonable? Am I being unreasonable? You know, is it am I being unreasonable to not want to go out with my father dressed as a woman? That feels like it's unreasonable. Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? Like, how do you say no to that? Yeah, how do you say no to that?
Very awkward.
Exactly. And
what are you going to do? Sit at home?
Conditioning, maybe. I mean, the other thing was, I do remember after a manic episode, and Lynn wasn't very pleasant during manic episodes. She would rant at me for all my misgivings, and we did have that when she had regained her equilibrium. We had that out, and I said, you don't do that again, and if you do that again, I did contemplate, you know, I know families do, for all kinds of reasons, nothing to do with transgender issues or anything like that, but everybody has the right to decide whether they want to continue a relationship that they're finding difficult or traumatic. You can walk away, and I came to that realization that I could walk away, that I didn't have to be responsible for another person, as Lynn had told me all those years ago. I was not responsible for her.
Mm.
And she was fiercely independent in lots of ways. So there was a moment, and I cut off a kind of, I cut myself off for a few days, and I think I lasted about 48 hours, and then made the decision that it would not work for me. It would not work to sever the ties and to not be part of her life. And that felt very empowering for me, to have thought about it seriously, to have mulled it over, and to gain a little bit of distance. And I think our relationship was better for it. And it was more about my attitude than any change in her attitude. So it was that, and we had ways of talking to each other, even when a manic episode, a couple more happened, and when we had a way of talking to each other, and we made an arrangement with a GP that they would speak to me as
Yes.
I had access to them as her daughter and as her next of kin, and some kind of recognition that it was that there was another, there was a problem there, and how much that had to do with, I can remember at the time doing some research myself and coming across a paper somewhere, I wish I'd kept it now and I haven't looked since, about misdiagnosis of other conditions, and and I do wonder, because the psychological, very light touch, and for somebody who's a grade A scholar and debater and arguer, she was so eloquent about things. She would have been able to be very convincing in terms of her own. And it turned out that way. It certainly made an interesting life.
I wonder with my father, I know that there was something wrong. And I think my dad knew that there was something wrong quite early on. But whether what my dad did in transitioning was really the answer, if there were other answers.
This is it, yeah.
Which David Bell talks about, I think, in the Stonewall podcast. He kind of says, we have a feeling that something is wrong, and there's a clinic called a gender clinic.
Yeah.
And you think, well, maybe what's wrong with me is the gender clinic.
Yeah.
It's something the gender clinic can sort out.
Yeah.
But if there was a sort of depression and anxiety clinic, or a manic or bipolar clinic, then you might be thinking maybe that's the thing, that the existence of the cure makes people think that they have the issue. And I wonder, because I just sometimes wonder, I think my dad has alienated everybody who's ever loved him.
Yeah.
And in the process, I sort of think, was that really what made you happy? Is that, and also in reflection, and Has like to ask what you think about this in terms of your experience as a daughter with Lynn. I think that for my father, what being a woman has always been a mystery. I know he's read a lot. He read all kinds of he read feminist books, he read all kinds of books. But in the sense, I don't think he ever really figured it out.
I think from my observations and experience, and having spoken to Lynn in detail and read what she wrote about the whole experience, I think she was, there were two things. One is being uncomfortable in her body.
Yeah.
And the second was rejecting a harsh male macho-ness that she saw. And back, if you think about it, back in those days, one of the people she most looked like was the policeman in 1970s TV programs.
Right.
and there was this kind of the idea of maleness, and if if any softer or more feminine, I think what Lynn was after was being kinder, more emotional, that she found it very difficult with the male role models in her own life, although she did know very, very gentle men, but clearly it was something she felt that she couldn't achieve without there being something dramatic.
Yes.
And
the dressing wasn't enough, because I'm thinking like the Beaumont Society, the wives in the Beaumont Society are always like, well, when he's Michelle, we'll go to an event and he'll dress as Michelle and have the wig and talk softly. That Michelle is like a nice person, a different person, a soft person. And I think, do men like that escape into a sort of feminine aspect to escape their masculinity? But Lynn, going further into the surgery, is there something else?
I haven't had a kind of massive grief reaction. I've felt very relieved, and I did used to. Well, I have joked about it before, but I did. When things were quite tough, I did often rehearse in my head what I would say at her funeral, in a kind of, God help me way. But actually, it was very cathartic writing her eulogy and honouring, really, and acknowledging what we'd all been through. So I was quite pleased with that. It was quite a kind of creative process, and it went down very well, and it was what I wanted. It was what I would have wanted, and I hope Lynn would have been pleased with it. But certainly there were so many different people from different parts of her life at that kind of event, that and since then I've continued to feel relieved that in some ways that it's all over. And that I'm no longer responsible for her for her there's that for her happiness and for her well-being. And I spent a lot of the last few weeks and months of her life reassuring her and reminding her of how good her life had been and how she had been able to be happy, and that we were all right, we were all fine, actually, frankly, and we're all adults, and and that she'd done everything that, because she did do everything that she could have done, other than remain my father. And even in some ways, he did remain my father in lots of ways, and we'd laugh about that very occasionally. So the reflection is, I just feel sorry in some ways. I think now that time has passed and I'm reflecting on it and I'm remembering, when you kind of write in somebody's eulogy, you focus on telling the truth, but actually what was great. And then since then I've been kind of revisiting some of the anger about some of the behavior. It's nothing to do, it wasn't, in some ways it wasn't to do, I know this sounds a bit odd, but it really wasn't to do with being trans. It was to do with being a bully. And being overbearing and being unpleasant, and that's how I can remember my brother used to say, if you scratch under the surface, I know just exactly how to poke the bear to get a response, which will prove prove that she's still the same under this different exterior. But that's just that. I think that was more about, Lynn had less need to be in control in the overbearing way. That she'd she had been during our childhood.
Mm.
You know, so there was less need to do that because of all kinds of reasons. She was living on her own, and we were grown up and all the rest of it. And so, you know, so yeah, so I guess what concerns me is when the acknowledgement of other people's rights to react in an emotional way, however they want to react. About that, I think, for me. And I did used to kind of pull her up if she'd ever sort of have a go at my mother for not being more understanding. I'd you know, I'd give it to her straight in terms of you know, what's reasonable expectation from somebody else emotionally.
So you were able to navigate quite a difficult and complex relationship very much as you matured on your own terms.
Yes, I think I did manage to
no to this isn't okay, and also help when necessary, you know, be the daughter.
Yeah, it gets easy. I mean, it gets easier as people get older and more dependent in lots of ways to be the daughter that I wanted to be. It got easier. She got easier to be kind to.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. That was just such an interesting interview. Thank you so much, Olwen.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. You know, for both of us, I know that talking about these things have been very useful. It's good to be asked questions and to reflect.
Yeah. Thank you.